talk months ago, and they're sort of, coming to culmination about that design work, and can't wait to see the recent slides of where they are. So I'm going to hand it over to Jim.
All right, thanks, Tom. Let me share my screen here. And I'll start the slideshow. Guys, I do this all day, and it's like the first time every time. All right, everybody see okay?
Yeah.
Okay, and you can see the one that's just the slide. It doesn't have the next slide on the side, or do I have to do something?
Correct. You're good.
Okay, good deal. All right. Well, thanks everybody, and thanks Darren. I haven't seen Darren in a few years. I saw him last. I think we went down to Blue Water, Baltimore, and just speaking personally, and also for my company, we love what you guys do, and we're so happy you're in our watershed. You've made a real difference down there. It's just great stuff. But anyway, thanks, I'll get going here. I'm going to briefly reintroduce myself and some of the site history. I realize some of you guys, you didn't see the original, and you're going to be like, where is this? And what are you doing? And why are you doing it? That's fine. So I'll reintroduce that and talk about who I am. What have we been up to all summer? What's next? And talk a little bit about monitoring and adaptive management. And then, of course, take your questions. And if you guys have questions midway through, just let me know. You can either put it in the chat box, or you can just come off mute. I'm an engineer. Sorry, I know, I'm an engineer. But that's okay. I've got lots of experience in stream and wetland restoration, and grew up not only in the gunpowder, but the local watersheds of southern Pennsylvania, where part of the gunpowder starts. And I'm as much a scientist as an engineer for sure. And I've done cold water fishery work through the Mid-Atlantic, New England, Midwest. So I'm really proud of specializing that and trying to make a difference for those types of fisheries, and working with different chapters of Trout Unlimited and different clients, everything from the EPA to private work like this. JMT, we're in Hunt Valley, proudly headquartered, also 50 years, pretty close to TU there. We're up to 1,875, and that's as of still May. It's probably even more than that now. We're a full service engineering firm. We have natural resource people, cultural resource people, and over 80 water resources and environmental specialists. So where is the Eccleston site? We're right at the corner of Park Heights Avenue and Green Spring Valley Road at the southwest corner, and that's part of the Bacher Farm. That's right there in Garrison. There was a dairy there years ago. It's generally agricultural. There's a golf course upstream. I'm right down the hill there from Chattaloney, if you guys know where that is. I first saw the site in 2008. And actually before that, because I used to drive by it every day when I went to Hopkins, because that's how I would sneak down to get there to avoid some of the traffic. We really started coordinating in 2017 to get something going there. We always knew that there was some potential here, that at least the site needed to be protected. And that idea sort of evolved as we started to collect data. So we reviewed extensive Department of Natural Resources data. They had electronic data into the 90s, and then they had Xeroxes of sheets before there were really well-established protocols from even before that, back into the 70s. And some of the people we worked with had actually been in the site in the 70s. So, we're looking at close to 50 years of data. And then, of course, we collected our own data, full benthic and fisheries assessment out there, as well as other investigations. And then we started some very detailed negotiations with agencies about what the appropriate way to protect the site was, which is not just restoration. There's a huge part of the site that is preservation and putting it into a protected easement. And I'll talk more about that later. So just a little bit of summary of the research we did on the site. It's very heavily impacted by clay tile drainage. People went in and dug ditches and put in chunks of clay tile. Comes in these like maybe 16 or 18-inch long sections, and that would be used to drain off water out of the site and to remove the wetlands. It had very aggressive agricultural use. It was intensively farmed as a dairy and then intensively farmed for grain operations until 3 years ago when JMT took over those activities and started to clean up the atrazine residual that was there. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. The Jones Falls was piped for about 1,200 feet there, and it diverted about 30 to 40% of the flow. There were at least 3 dams there, and one of them was still intact, and lots of invasive species. And, you know, invasive species are a very common thing. Another thing I'll add too is the forest was dominated by green ash, and the emerald ash borer came in during our study and actually killed off pretty much all the green ash, which removed a lot of the canopy. That was throughout the whole Green Spring Valley, as well as other nearby areas up in Worthington and so forth. And that really had a devastating effect, I would say, on the condition of the forest and the stream as a result of that. And we were collecting thermal data through all of that. We knew that the brown trout fishery was in decline based on the 1998 through 2014 DNR surveys. We found that trout were extremely abundant for the limited sampling that DNR did in 1998. When we did our survey in 2018, we found fewer trout in 6,000 feet of stream than they found in 200 feet. And we also found an abundance of warmer species had moved in, showing that the fishery was changing from a dominated cold water fishery towards a warmer one. And then we really found even more evidence of historic agricultural impacts, various structures and drainage structures and ditching and tile. There was a waterworks structure. We had historical aerials showing realignment of the channel, and also the whole site was deforested in the not so recent past. Here's a 1927 aerial that shows the whole site. The Green Spring Valley and Park Heights intersection would be sort of off to the right where the map fold is there. And as you can see in 1927, there wasn't a tree on this place. And you can see the cattle actually standing out there. You can see various drainage patterns. You can see roads and a house that are no longer there. You can see the rail bed, which was probably abandoned by this time. That's been abandoned for a while, but basically no trees and heavily impacted by agriculture. In 1953, we gained a few trees in the neighboring parcels, but here the dairy has been removed and it's into more rotational pasture, and I think they did some just regular beef production, not an intensive dairy, but it's still heavily grain farmed. There's roads and houses that are now gone, and still very few trees, but you can see a few have crept in. And it's amazing, you know, because we have, you know, every reason to believe that certainly in 1927, 1953, that there were probably brown trout here, and they were maybe using this seasonally, but I would have to think based on this that, you know, the temperatures would not have been quite suitable back then. We noticed a lot of impacts of the contemporary agriculture on the site. And this was, they had the family who owns the farm, they had a tenant farmer in there who farmed every single piece right up to the stream. And JMT then rented that land so we could use it. We put it into winter rye, which reseeded for 2 years. And then in the 3rd year, we noticed that weeds started showing up, which told us that the atrazine residual was gone. And we actually noticed an impact on the quality of life out there, more benthos in the stream, better fish utilization. So we had various infractions from the tenant farmer involving the disposal of stones, soil, and debris directly into the stream. My understanding is back in either the early 90s or 80s, some of you guys might have been involved. There was a stream crossing that was put in, and it was actually cleaned up and fixed as a result of that infraction, but we took care of it completely now. They farmed directly to the stream edge, and that was for as long as I can remember on the site, all the way back to 2008. They really excessively used herbicide. And when you combine that with all the tile drainage, all that leachate drained right through those drained soils and right into the stream. I would go out there and they would spray, you know, their whatever chemical cocktails they were using multiple times a year. You ever go to the hardware store and you smell that real strong chemical smell in the lawn and garden section? That's how this site smelled a lot of the times out there.
Oh, wow.
Oh yeah, it was gross. And then the historic drainage tile system was just conveying that ag runoff right into the stream. it was falling through what, you know, those soils had lost so much of their organic matter. There wasn't a lot of chance for some of those things to bind to that, and it just drained right in there. This is the typical farming practices for the last year that the farmer was out there. And you can see this is corn directly adjacent to a stream. The water kind of has a tinge to it. I didn't do chemical testing of that, but we had an idea that, you know, some of that was ag-related, some of it was just natural tannins, but, you know, you'd go out there and there would be very present smell of agricultural chemicals and, you know, visible erosion right into the stream. This is what the typical banks look like out there, about 2 to 3 feet high, but a really pronounced, what we call a basal gravel layer. And, you know, I'll skip some of the, I think I gave about an hour and a half presentation last time, but that gravel has all the components that you need for trout spawning in it, all the sizes and fractions, and it's the right quality stuff that when you have a stream that's very entrenched like this, a lot of those gravels are then lost downstream, and you're left with only the big chunks left, which are more difficult for spawning. And I'll touch more on that later, but we had this incised situation here. But fortunately, we had the room to work with it. You know, Darren's project, you know, very confined, a lot of watershed pressures. You know, it's amazing the work that's happened there, given those things and the success that it's been. Here we had a lot more room, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. Here you can see, here's an actual tile outfall of how much water you were conveying out of the tile. And then you can see, it's hard to see, but in the lower photo there's multiple outlets from tile coming in there. And you can see there's basically no buffer in many of these sections. This is a close-up of one of those tile. This is actually an inlet. It went to a spring box, and it took about 900 feet of tributary, certainly several hundred feet of tributary. Don't quote me on the 900 feet part, and totally diverted the stream and dried it out. And on the right side there, you can see that this stream only flowed because all the base flow was lost to this diversion. It only flowed when you had enough water in the stream to overcome the diversion, so only storm events. Fun fact, I actually found a volleyball on the site and I jammed it in that pipe, and we were able to put water in it for 6 months prior to see what the potential would be if we put flow back into it. And the benthos came right back, and we actually found about 8 small trout in there. So we're like, all right, we're onto something. We know that we can have potential if we remove just this diversion. This is the outlet for that. And this is the stream water from that diversion pipe. And this would come from the north down into the site, past Bosley Wright's house, that beautiful stone English country house that's right on Green Spring Valley Road. This tributary comes through there. And the whole thing went into this pipe. And I always thought this was just a spring outfall until I looked in it one day and there were fish swimming in it. I'm like, well, that's weird. So we got a tile probe out and we traced it back and actually found that inlet. The videos never work right on Zoom, so I'll skip that. So all of this was part, along with a waterworks, was used to produce quote unquote clean milk at Burnside Farms. And this was a popular way of cooling and milk and cleaning the dairy. And people thought that you would be less likely, I think it was to get tuberculosis, if that was the case for this process. I don't think there was a lot of truth to that, but long story short, it required really a lot of water and cold water pumped all the way to the top of Burnside Hill to the milk house up there. And there were 2 330-foot deep wells, and this was all powered by an overshot water wheel from a dam and diversion on the Jones Falls. This was quite the effort to put it in 1915, and I'm sure it cost a lot of money. The pumps themselves, they stood about 5 feet tall. They were Gold's pumps. Gold's is still in business. And I was actually able to look up and find out what type of pump they were and look at the pump plates to figure that out. These were piston pumps. They were meant to put high pressure water all the way up to that hill. And they withdrew a lot of groundwater and diverted the stream almost completely, the Jones Falls, that is, during its time in use, and continued to far after their time in the 1950s, diverting the Jones Falls, where only seasonally, when enough water was in the Jones Falls or something clogged the inlet, would you get the full flow through the central part of the site. That waterworks dam was there It dates to 1915 through the 20s. They had modified it. We found some of this information at the Maryland Historical Society, and it was in great shape. It was a concrete structure, and it had no signs of falling apart or breaking up until we put a hydraulic hammer on it, of course, and broke it into a million pieces and got it out of there last fall. It lined approximately 14 feet of the stream, or 40 feet of the stream, completely with concrete. Nobody, I think, expected to find that, and diverted 30 to 40% in its existing condition, probably 100% when it was fully working, into an underground pipe through a 1,200-foot diversion. Depending on how debris would rack on the dam, you would either have a 6-foot jump in the dam or you would have a 3-foot jump. And either way, it was an impediment to trout movement, as we saw it, as well as other species. And we restored that area completely, and there's no trace of that. This site has a very well documented history of having excellent groundwater here, so much that we found an account that it cast a blue cast when put into a white porcelain bathtub. And that was certainly the case. We knew there was a tremendous groundwater resource here because of the hydrology that was basically bottled up in many respects, because it had all this overburdened soil from mill damming. There was multiple mill dams as well as the waterworks dam that kept water from expressing in the floodplain. You would think the tile would express a lot of this, but a lot of that went into the diversion and totally circumvented the site. It exited right out down about 300 feet above Park Heights Avenue. So the site was missing this important groundwater component. And I don't need to remind you guys that groundwater entering your stream is going to thermally regulate it, and it's going to create temperatures conducive to trout. This is the outfall of that. This thing was built to last. At this time, when we took these photos, this structure is 103 years old, and it's still conveying approximately 30% of the Jones Fault flow around the central part of the site. So we knew at the very least that needed to come out. This is the size of that diversion. Here's where it's actually exposed and still conveying water. It's about 24 inches in diameter, so you could very comfortably fit all the base flow of the Jones Falls into that. There was also a quarry on the site, and the local legend is there that this is what stone was quarried to make Bosley's house, as well as a few other houses in the valley down there. And it had become the dumping ground of the neighbors and probably people who cared even less about it than the neighbors. We found a car in there. We found an oil tank. We found 4 dumpsters full of tires. We also coincidentally found, and there's people old enough on this call to remember it, remember those old Maytag Ringer washers with the Ringer rollers on the top and the agitator and a gas engine underneath? We pulled about 15 of those out of this hole. And they all went to junk. When you're working on a site that has resources like this, you really better have good goals, and you really better collect a lot of data, that data to inform your design. We had 40 years of historic fishery data, potentially up to 50 if you were reading some of the numbers correctly. 5 years and counting of red counts, and I'll actually be starting that in another week. Can somebody go on mute? I'm getting a big echo here. There we go. I think that's okay. Actually, I'm still hearing it. All right, that's much better. All right, thanks. We have 15-minute thermal data. And when you talk to DNR, this is very not typical. 15-minute thermal data allows us to look at actual impacts to the thermal regime of the stream from storm events. And what we found is if you looked at the average temperature out there, it was really pretty good. We were usually below 68. But what we found is in the summer, and this would be measuring riffle temperature, we knew the pool stayed cool because they're further down and larger volume and more buffered. So we measured riffle and foraging area type of areas for thermal data, and we found that the temperature shift was some days in the summer 15 degrees, but sometimes almost 30 degrees in the summer. That's really a big deal and puts a lot of stress on fish. You get mortality with swings like that. And what was really interesting is in the winter, you would think, oh, this is a spring-fed stream, it's going to stay around a constant 55. we found that the stream would very frequently swing from around 55, the groundwater temperature, all the way down to 32, still moving but not frozen, which told us that there was a real disconnect between the groundwater table and the actual stream itself. This was a huge revelation for us. This told us that we really needed to get what we call hypereic connectivity, the connection of that surface stream flow with groundwater flows. And it is the pinnacle goal of this project to reconnect that. And I'll give you the spoiler. By doing this, we've added approximately 30% of base flow to the stream at all times. I don't know of another site where that's been done. It's a wonderful thing that we didn't expect, but it's a welcome benefit and certainly something our design can accommodate. We did a new benthic survey, a new fishery survey. We had an independent biologist do it. We had Martha McCauley at EA do it. She does great work. I've known her for, oh my gosh, pushing 12, 13 years now, and I used to work with her. She's a great biologist and did a really good survey for us. And I wanted that to be totally independent data, so no one from my company accompanied her. She went out there, she picked all her own habitat sites, and I told her to pick the absolute best habitat and tell me as good as it gets out there. And what we found was there's still a lot of trout out there, but there's a lot of warm water species creeping in, and we found less trout total in the 6,000 feet of survey than we did, DNR did, only surveying the one reach above Park Heights. That was very eye-opening to me. And the other thing that was very surprising to me is I had been out there and I've done a lot of benthic identification and stuff over the years. I had found 10 years ago a lot of really decent benthic species there. Mayflies, stoneflies, all the things that you guys like to, you know, mimic as a fly and use, all those great species that trout like to forage on. And we found very few when Martha did her survey. In the entire reach, and all of the benthos scored using the Maryland system, MBSS system, as poor or very poor. I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And we think a lot of that had to do with the intensive agricultural usage that was occurring at the time, but also the loss of the green ash canopy. We also did a full wetland delineation, forest investigation, all that to Army Corps standards, as well as Maryland DNR or Baltimore County standards. So here are the highlights of the data collection. I've already hinted at some of those. We found an increasing abundance in warm water tolerant species. So that told us that the water was warming and those species were starting to fill that niche. Trout were not observed to reproduce in any of the locations we restored. And that was really interesting to us because, you know, that if there was trout reproduction happening somewhere, we weren't going to go in there and restore it. We look at that as a keystone functional value, you know, and those reaches you don't mess with. But the whole central part of the site, because of the flow diversion and what I later did a controlled study when we removed the dam, a lack of smaller substrates, smaller gravels for them to reproduce in, they weren't reproducing in the center of the site. That's directly contrast to what DNR found in the 70s and what Bosley had told me. And Bosley knows his stuff about trout reproduction. I have confidence of that. I've talked to him for years now about this. In the 70s and early 80s, they were finding reproduction in the middle of the site. We weren't finding that later, and we really wanted to understand why that was. And it took about 5 years of study to figure that out. The tributaries contributing to the main stem of the Jones Falls were mostly too warm to support trout in the summer. And the main stem thermal range during the day was typically between 15 and 20 degrees, often in the summer, and same in the winter, but sort of the other way, swinging colder with air temperature. And the benthos was poor, I already mentioned that. We were able to determine that so, you know, how did we determine that substrate was the limiting factor for the reproduction in the center part of the site? At first, we thought it was the diversion in the dam. So right before the trout closure of October 1st, which runs through April 30th, we removed the dam and that limited the diversion. So the diversion was no longer functioning. We got the full flow of the Jones Falls through an untouched Jones Falls all winter because we didn't work in the channel during the winter. And what we found is there were a couple places where we disturbed the stream bed to put in temporary stream crossings. And the trout tried to reproduce in those disturbed parts of the bed, but not other parts of the reach. that was extremely enlightening. And the main difference between those disturbed parts of the bed versus the other riffles in the reach and glides is that you had smaller substrate. You had a lot of fingernail, like thumbnail sized gravel present in those disturbed areas where they put in the temporary stream crossing, which is just a great big wooden bridge that goes across that they can run the machines over. And the other areas they didn't use, but in all of the areas where we had reliably seen spawning up in our preservation areas, they were still spawning abundantly up there. We found that the existing dam was a real blockage to young of year fish. And that's really surprising to me because if you talk to the guys in the hatchery, they call them popcorn trout and they can leap pretty far, but they can't make it over a dam with 3 feet of woody debris racked over it. You know, they were not able to leap across that in a lot of cases. So we found a difference in the fishery with that. Though we found the same types of species throughout the entire reach. There was a real deficiency in woody overhead cover, young of year rearing areas and other types of refugia, and also overwintering habitats. So, you know, previously there were two really good deep pools where fish could overwinter. And that was really important because we were getting such a swing towards, you know, 30-ish degrees in the winter. There's a really deep pool up in the preservation area where I could always reliably find 30 or 40 browns. And right below Park Heights, because the culvert is kind of undersized, there's a great big scour pool down there that's probably 10 feet deep. And that reliably had probably hundreds of fish in it over the winter because that was a place where they could stay warm enough. We changed that, by the way, and I'll show pictures of that. The big thing too was we were finding that conservation alone was not maintaining the abundance of trout. There had been really no change in the agriculture on the site, maybe different chemicals sprayed, but they were still farming everything that they were in the 70s that I could tell from photos that the Batchers sent me. There really hasn't been a lot of development in the watershed. You know, the golf course has been there for a long time. There's a lot of older houses there. There's not a lot of new developments. You know, and, you know, Valley's Planning Council and other stakeholders have really kept the lid on a lot of the development through that area. So, you know, why was this happening with all these sort of, you know, relatively unchanged things? And one thing that we put our finger on was, you know, there could be changes to the ag uses, but there's also a more prevalence of invasive species. There's the emerald ash borers I talked about, which removed a lot of those ash trees, and they became a real hazard on the site. They actually crushed the roof of 2 excavators while we were doing the job, and we had the well demolition cages onto them. But the big thing we came back to is that this site had been so impacted from the 1800s forward. And it was really left to almost rest, except for the agriculture, you know, from the 1960s on, that there was this systematic, persistent unraveling due to the stream being ditched and the wetlands being tiled, and you were losing those smaller substrates as you went through all this. And then, of course, we saw a warming client as a persistent issue for cold water species. And couple that with a lack of groundwater and hyperetic exchange, couple that with a loss of canopy, and you're really gonna see, you know, a declining cold water fishery. So, you know, given that there are things alive here and that conservation alone wasn't doing it, our goals included preserving habitats that we still saw as stable. So there were pieces of forest that were not dominated by ash; they were dominated by maples and oaks that still had good habitat. They had eroding banks, but, you know, we weren't really concerned about the erosion because we still had trout living there and other cold water species. So we wanted to preserve those areas. We wanted to increase the amount of hyperetic exchange I've talked about and the base flow in the stream by either removing the diversions or exposing floodplain to bleed that cold groundwater in there. We wanted to improve the physical quantity of available habitat, more riffles, better diversity in pools, having more woody debris and woody overhead cover, having shallow emergent habitats connected to the stream that could be young of year habitat. That's a really important thing, and I have very seldom seen the opportunity, or at least that practice done in the state of Maryland. We wanted to add small side channels that would be refugia and young of year habitat because, you know, prior to agriculture impacting the site, you know, in a pristine condition, there would have been probably beaver here and very narrow, small channels everywhere with a lot of herbaceous cover over it. So we wanted to make sure we tried to replicate those types of habitats. And we had some good references, not only in the Jones Falls, but in other watersheds, both in Maryland and Pennsylvania, we could draw from. We wanted to improve the in-channel gravel substrates so we could have clean spawning gravels. I've talked a little bit about that before. And obviously we wanted to restore wetlands because that's our water quality engine, to get those flood flows out into the wetlands, connected floodplains, and that's going to help restore the watershed and make the water that comes out of the site cleaner than the water that goes into it. And we also were able to convince the landowner to no longer have commercial agriculture on the site, which gives us 400-foot plus buffers, which is absolutely unprecedented. Maryland regulates the 25-foot buffer. Typical ag practices, best management practices offer a 70-foot buffer. It's really not enough on a cold water trout stream. So we wanted to maximize that. So we have approximately 400-foot buffers. And when this reforests itself, you'll actually have what we call FIDS habitat, forest interior dwelling species habitat, because you'll have such connectivity of large tracts of forest together. That coupled with a trout stream in 100 years is going to have a huge value. It's going to be unique. And that's how far ahead we were looking for these. So, you know, with those goals in mind, we said, what should this look like? Small spring-fed base flow channels, a connected floodplain, which I've talked about, full of sedges, rushes, sporadic trees and shrubs. They're not so sporadic. They're planted on 12-foot centers. I'll show you a picture of that. Groundwater connected stream and wetland systems. So we want the water in the wetlands and the stream and the ground exchanging through the entire site. That gives you a rough, bumpy, and hummocked floodplain. That gives you clean gravel because you're connecting back to that basal gravel substrate. Possible beaver interaction. This site can handle having beaver on it, and we know historically from trapping records and various accounts that they were here in abundance and they were part of a thriving fur trade. You know, removing those beaver had an impact. And I know a lot of you guys are like, well, if I ever beaver dam, I won't necessarily have, you know, trout migration. They're a blockage to fish passage. Not necessarily. You know, I like to think about blockages as whether they're generational or not. A large concrete dam like Bloody Dam, that's a generational fish barrier. A beaver dam, which may breach periodically or have various slides or channels around it, not quite as much. And we knew that, you know, there was a thriving brook trout fishery interacting with beaver as well. We overall want low energy, vegetated, low bed load sediment supply systems. And bed load sediment supply means that the stream doesn't have the power to erode its own gravel bed. It's just going to transmit watershed type of sediments, you know, sands and small gravels, and accrete those in ways that are beneficial for habitat. So we want to embrace our native geology as well as our native ecology. And I know browns aren't native, but they're a good surrogate for brook trout. And I think one day we'll get there on this site. The good news is when you embrace that geology, you work with a stream that's based on gravel in this area. And that's a really nice gravel. And this is a picture of the gravel that we found on this site, which is identical to some of the spawning gravels that you'll see in the upper gunpowder and brook trout areas and things of that. There's also a hydric soil layer. This is a buried wetland that we found out there. This is very commonly found. It has a lot of sediment from mill dams and agriculture on top of it, but it's a black carbon-rich soil, and surprise, it still has viable seed even though it's been buried for 400 years. So that's a really important thing. And I'll show pictures of what that looks like. The other thing is, it's not enough to do a project like this and be once and done and never go in there. You have to follow through. There are protective easements recorded in place and fully funded with endowments in fall of 2021. So this site had, you know, it potentially could have been developed. It's at the intersection of two major routes. I'm sure somebody would have wanted a Walmart or Royal Farms there. And now there's a protective easement on the part of the property that we restored. You know, we're hoping to restore the rest or protect the rest of the property in a similar way. So that easement is about 55 of the 99 acres, and it's the most sensitive areas, and the rest is still out of production. we also have to go along with that funded endowment. There's a monitoring and adaptive management plan, because you don't just go in here one time. This is a work in progress and will be for at least the next 10 years. We started actual moving dirt in August of 2021, and we awarded that to SMC, which is out of Parkton. So these are local folks keeping money in the local economy. SMC is a fully woman-owned business, and Empire Landscaping, who is their subcontractor, is also a fully woman-owned business. So almost all of this all the construction is completed by fully woman-owned businesses. So I thought that was a great thing that we could do. They also do great work, which is, you know, icing on the cake. In-channel work ended by October 1st, 2022. We were out of the channel about a week before that. That way we could wrap up any loose ends if we had to get back in, and that's when the closure started. That's mandated by our permit. Planting is in progress, and they hope to finish by December. There is a deer fence around part of this property because we didn't want to have all those tree cages being out in the floodplain. That's going to be finished, they claim, this week, but I kind of don't believe it. I kind of think it'll be November. We have an erosion sediment control permit. We have a lot of different control measures for that, which we enforced very strictly. And that will be closed out as vegetation establishes probably in the spring of next year. And monitoring and adaptive management will conclude in 2033. So that's a long time, folks. You know, when you do a project like this, you got to see it through. And we're fully funded through 2023 to make sure that what needs to happen to keep this site moving in the right direction happens. This is from fall of 2021. You can see all the leaves are off the trees. Pretty much all these trees are green ash. There was a couple other trees mixed in there. Some of the better trees that were still alive and not green ash, there was some honey locust and black walnuts and things like that out there. They were covered in English ivy. They weren't long for this world. But you can see the magnitude of disturbance from these drone photos of, you know, what we were doing. But still, the actual Jones Falls in the middle of the frame, still not touched yet at that point. We were working and building offline to create fully vegetated, established channel prior to diverting the Jones Falls into it. This is just another vantage point of the site. We don't just work in the stream, we work in the upland area too. We had mowed off that rye and meadow that is established there. We have erosion sediment control practices, and we were laying down dirt up there from the floodplain excavation. This is in spring. This site is designed to seasonally inundate. That's what our floodplain is for. And there are times of the year when there's fully 2 or 3 inches of water fully over the floodplain. And I can tell you the contractors, they were pretty confused. They'd never worked on a stream where when we finally put it into the new channel, the whole floodplain was flooded without a rain event. So that was fun. They were a little confused, but we got through it and figured out ways to work with that. This is summer. These are new photos that you guys haven't seen. This is how these areas have fully established with emergent wetland vegetation. This is basically 100% native wetland vegetation. About half of these species we planted. The rest volunteered from the seed bank that we found. I know you guys didn't come here to look at floodplain pictures. You wanted to see what the stream looks like. This is the top end. This is a riffle we constructed using the native gravels that are here. Only one rock in this photo is imported. It's that large blue one that's pinning a log vein up there, and that's a limestone rock from Barrett Quarry. We very sparingly used imported rock material, and we wanted to use something that geochemically would work with the trout fishery, and limestone is a great choice for that. There's lots of great limestone streams out there, and we had Cockeysville marble to work with here, which also has a similar effect on pH and water quality. So we used that limestone very sparingly, and then we built a lot of things with the Cockeysville marble that we found. And this is a riffle that we sort of improvised because we had to do a slight field change to tie into a really good piece of stream. We wanted to have as minimal impact as possible. And the trout, there's some beautiful pools up and downstream of this that they just zip up and down this. I've seen some large ones go through. This is the main stem of the Jones Falls. This is very different from what it looked like before. In this instance, it's about 3 feet wide, it's about 1 foot deep, and it has all this shallow connected vegetation as part of it. And this is great young a year habitat. We had Maryland fisheries out today, and they said the same thing. They were really happy with reaches like this. And this is why we wanted to build stream offline, vegetate it, get that vegetation established, and then put the base flow of the Jones Falls into it. Very unprecedented thing that we did there.
Jim, that looks beautiful.
Isn't it neat? Isn't it cool? This is an example of one of the floodplain wetlands. Everywhere you guys see this pooled water, think of that as a slight floodplain depression. We don't want to make a parking lot, people. We want it to be rough and hummocky and bumpy. And you know, whenever I talk to you know, stewardship-minded organizations like you guys, you're like, but Jim, this looks really hard to fish. And it is. It's very challenging. It's not a great site to fish, but it's a great place to raise trout. And there's places you can still fish, you know, and you'd have to talk to the landowner if you actually want to do that.
Spoiler alert, everybody, the Jones Falls in general is hard to fish. So it's not.
It is.
Don't think this is the period.
Yeah, if it's not the private landowners not granting permission,
it's a narrow, typically a narrow channel with a lot of vegetation, you know, overhang. So absolutely,
yeah. So I talked a lot about gravel substrates. This is a natural riffle, and what's really interesting, I didn't have a photo of it, I couldn't find it. There's Cockeysville marble bedrock here with quartz gravel overlain over top of it. And this is a glide. And one of the things I really focus on when I do my restorations, and I've been doing trout work for, you know, 17, 18 years now. After day one of construction, you want pronounced riffles, runs, pools, and glides from day one. And we've really refined that. This is a beautiful glide coming out of a nice deep pool. It goes into a riffle. This is all native material. I looked at this today. It looks the same. By golly, I really think they want to spawn there, but we'll find out. We'll find out in a couple weeks. Usually around election day out here, they want to spawn. But this is that type of beautiful mixed gravel, multiple sizes. There's big stuff for roughness. There's small stuff that's able to be moved, and it's a very loose gravel bed. This is another one of those shallow connected emergent habitats taken this summer, this photo. This is a large pool that has this connected point bar area with shallow emergent habitat. So you have room for the adults out in the larger pool. There's some woody debris structure out there as well that they can hide in. And then the juvenile fish have areas that are actually protected from those larger fish for their protection and foraging. So a really important thing. We moved fish. It wasn't part of our permit, but we thought it was really essential to relocate these fish. I'm electrofisher trained. I think I'm the only engineer around here who might be. Let me know if you guys ever need it as part of your organizational efforts. We're happy to lend a hand. But I'm not ashamed to say that we've caught the largest trout, at least that I have in the state of Maryland, out at this reach. The largest one that came out was about 16 inches. And we also, more importantly, caught a lot of young a year trout out of here. So we did a lot of relocation. I was actually talking to the fisheries guys today, and I know it sounds counterintuitive. We could have saved more fish out here if we were allowed to work in the stream without pumping around. There's three things fish will run from, and that's a fisherman if they see you. It's an excavator if the bucket's in the water, and it's a man with an electrofisher. So with all those things in mind, you know, there were places where we did lose some fish because we just could not get the electrofisher into some of the areas because of brushy cover and things like that. We tried our best, and we did a lot of hand dip netting. I've spent hundreds of hours at least, you know, moving fish and making sure this is right. And we really moved a lot of fish. We moved thousands of fish, and not just trout, folks. There's a whole other supporting fishery out there. And you know, what else comes with the electrofisher? Dragonfly larvae. Okay, we moved those too. Crayfish. We didn't see an invasive crayfish. A lot of salamanders. Boy, they're really hard to catch with an electrofisher. Hopefully a lot of those crawled away. We're planting the whole thing. As you guys saw before, we use that woody debris as roughness and habitat in the floodplain. This is one of the smaller tributaries. This was all dominated by dead green ash and porcelainberry. There was about 2 feet of excavation here. We're back down on that basal gravel, and then everything gets planted with large trees. If anybody's driven by the site, there was $1 million worth of trees at the corner there. They're all about 5 feet high and in containers. They're really beautiful stock. A lot of it is grown in Maryland, some in Georgia, some in Tennessee. And we're planting it in 12-foot centers. And then we'll do a lot of adaptive management, replacing trees, seeing what succeeds, additional planting if areas aren't dense enough, and then live staking, using Rhodosia dogwoods, black willows, silky dogwoods, viburnums. Those are all things that we can do in this type of soil. And as you can see, these trees are just starting to harden off. It's just the right time to go and put them in. Every riffle on this site is different. When you look at this from, just a fishing perspective, this site would afford a different experience, different times of the year, and in different places. We really strive to have unique habitats. And here you can see those shallow emergent connected habitats. Here we have a really nice riffle running into a pool, woody debris, this log for overhead cover, a lot of diversity in the width and size and depth of the riffles and pools out here. That's something we really wanted to focus on. This is the same stream 100 feet away. It looks almost totally different. You have totally different submerged habitats. We have so much watercress that is volunteered on this site. And a lot of you may know that that's edible and it's delicious and you can make a salad out of it. And it also loves pristinely cold, clear spring water. And we found watercress volunteering in those places where the groundwater was upwelling. And I bet there's close to an acre or two of watercress out there spread out across the site. So really impressive feat there. This is another picture of the floodplain. This is right after we got about 3 inches of rain in a day at one time. And it really didn't do much to the site. You could hardly tell anything happened. We have these shallow emergent channels that are connected through, and on the left side of the screen, the bottom there, we have a fascine bundle. These are intended to be a porous control for that channel where fish can still get through, but it's going to catch woody debris and leaves, and it'll also be a barrier to large fish, so you can get small fish utilizing this in relative protected cover, unless the birds get them. We have a lot of birds that we didn't have before. We have a nesting bird survey that we completed prior to construction, and we'll be comparing that following construction. And we also have some information on migratory birds as well, and I've seen a lot more, but that's not really my forte. I have some really good birders at work, and when I call something a little brown bird, they get very upset. We have lots of different little brown birds that they seem to be very excited about. The Batchers were kind enough to supply me with a photo from 1974, and I have the same vantage point for summer 2022. And you can see that on the left there, a lot of this was farmed, and now on the right, it's a living channel with a lot of ecological diversity. Again, this is another riffle picture, and this has what I call a channel barb next to it. It's a connected emergent habitat, but a little more defined. It's similar to what you would see if a stream was migrating and created an oxbow. Just a fun little feature there. And with that, I want to thank you guys, and I will open it up to questions.
Question. My name is Scott Schindel. I live on Park Heights Avenue, but outside the Beltway between Michelle and Sugar Hill. Is this the property on the left heading north, south of Green Spring Valley Road?
Correct.
Okay. Unfortunately, I don't have any access. I don't own any water access, but I see up road from me, there's a bridge that gets blown out all the time just south of this property. And I'm wondering, what impact and what, sort of resolution, might be had for that. It's a bridge on the right.
That's a great question. And I, because of the crowd here, I try to stay away from the engineering side of things. When we restore a floodplain like this, we improve floodplain storage. We added 43,000 cubic yards of floodplain storage. That's really enough to attenuate peak discharges going through there. So we should see some impacts of reducing flooding downstream. And I think I know the bridge you're talking about. The bridge at Park Heights is owned by Maryland State Highway Administration. It's a concrete box culvert. They put it in 1953. That overtops in about the 25-year storm. I haven't done an analysis to see how it would overtop now, but I would have to think that we would, certainly help that situation as well. I don't know if it's ever been overtopped. That's just what our hydraulic model was telling us as to the interval that it might be possible that it be overtopped.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Any other questions?
Jim, real quick, this is Jay Boynton. That was an extremely enlightening presentation. I have not heard anything like that in a long time. And I applaud you. I applaud you for your work. I guess the only thing I can say is I don't know if it's possible, but I would hope at some point with the longevity of the project that, somehow our membership in the chapter can somehow get involved and help out.
Absolutely. Yeah, so I've talked to Tom about this quite a bit. The landowner is a bit gun shy to have people there while there's construction going on. But after that's closed out, we're happy to have you all out and to see it and to experience it. We're in an age of liability, and this is not a site right now that's great for people who may have mobility problems. And I'm 41, I'll be 42 in a few months here. And guys, I wore out a pair of boots and my knees hurt more this year than they did last year. A lot of it is this site. So, I often trip on matting stakes and woody debris and all kinds of things out there. So, we just want to be careful with that access. But no, we'll talk to the landowners, and I'm sure it'll be fine as soon as the yellow equipment goes away. Someone looks like they're on mute and they're talking.
I keep pushing the button.
There you go.
Okay. Just underplanting. A suggestion to put in ferns, to stabilize the banks. Is that a possibility?
So here's the deal with ferns. Right now, there's a lot of existing sun out there. And most ferns, they like a lot of shade.
No, I was thinking where you plant the trees, underneath the trees.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But those trees have to establish more before we can start to put those types of herbaceous species in there.
Okay, well then, yeah. And then the other question I have is about just aesthetics of the deer fence. And, because it's obviously a beautiful, valley view, especially up at Burnside. Mm-hmm. And how much deer fence are you deer fencing the whole 55 acres or?
Yeah, so the whole parcel is 99 acres and the deer fence is only further down in the valley for the protection of the wetland plantings, basically. So you can't really see a lot of it from the road. And some of the folks up on Burnside, we've actually had down there and we've talked to them a lot about it. There's a piece we restore at the intersection that does not get deer fence. Those get tree cages. They're not as effective because the deer like to rub on stuff. But we figured because of the aesthetic, we better not do that up there. We don't want to ruin people's view shed. And then additionally, around the outside of the deer fence, it's all going to be restored into warm season meadow. A lot of it's already warm season meadow. That has about a height of about 5 feet. So the deer fence is only 8 feet tall. So you really lose a lot of that. But the deer fence, I look at it, it's sort of a necessary evil. I have 55 acres of plantings and over $1 million of plantings that we need to protect. If I were to put tree cages down in the floodplain, they would be very frequently toppled over by flood flows, debris, and also deer still rubbing on them. Combined with, there's 2 hunters that help manage the deer population on the site there. So, there's probably 30 deer per square mile down there. It's really probably a lot.
By the way, they can get over they can get over 8 feet. We have a lot of deer fencing where I live. We don't have it.
Oh yeah. We're going after those lazy deer, you know, that just want to dine at the salad bar, basically, that we planted. So yeah, I mean, it's a toss up, you know, and that's what we saw as the best alternative. It's intended to come down once the tree's established. And you know, realize, you know, we're putting up, you know, it's about $300,000 to put that fence up, and then we tear it down at the end. It's necessary. We wouldn't do it if we didn't think it was.
Too bad.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. But thank you for what you're doing. So, excellent project.
Thanks. I appreciate it.
I'm
Any
just
other questions? Looks like.
Well, I have as a comment just because I'm going to reiterate what JB said about the quality of your presentation and your work, and it was, you know, very illuminating, because I've done work on the Stone Dairy building up on Burnside. And to think about that, they were pumping cold water all the way up to that building to keep the milk cold is pretty amazing. And it also explains why I find these deep dry wells on the property, like right around the building itself.
Yeah, so they had, it was a 3-inch ductile iron pipe, and the right-of-ways you can still find in a title search for that. So they had multiple right-of-ways for that 3-inch ductile iron pipe, and there were several that went all the way up there. We're talking about 2 miles of pipe here. Yeah. And then in terms of the tile drains that we removed, we probably removed, and by removing, I mean crushing in place, we removed about 5 miles of clay tile. And then what we found was there was a potable water supply down on the original Bacher farm across from Park Heights. And that dam and that pump house is still there. And we found a wooden stave water pipe about 12 inches in diameter, built like a barrel with the hoops and staves. And that probably dated to around 1830. And that still was full of water. We couldn't believe it. We tried to save that, pulling it out, but it just shattered into 100 pieces. But pieces of oak with either tar or charring on the inside, built as a continuous barrel all the way up through the valley, still present.
I have to ask though, upon discovery of some of this stuff, did there have to be any disclosure to the Maryland Historical Trust? I mean,
that's a great question. So we worked with Dixie Henry beforehand, and we sent, there's these things that we call trilogy letters, where you say, hey, we're going to work here. Is there anything that we should be concerned about? And they came back and said no. And I'm like, so I emailed Dixie Henry. I don't know if any of you guys know Dixie Henry. Dixie is a super cool person and really knows her stuff. And I'm like, okay, we found this. Are you sure? Are you absolutely sure you're not interested in this? And we said, you know, and Chatalonia is right upstream. So Chatalonia was a settlement for formerly enslaved people. There was the Chatalonia Springwater Company there. So like they knew that there was good groundwater here.
And the Piscataway already knew about all this, all the quality of the water, you know, that.
Exactly. And, you know, the neighbors are telling me, so like Doug Carroll and Bosley are like, yeah, when they used to plow the field, we'd find arrowheads and pottery all the time. And I'm like, all right, so there's probably a settlement here. I'm like, Dixie, are you sure? Third time, okay, are you sure? We found all this stuff. And she said, listen, we know about the dairy, it's documented, you know, that's not super interesting to us. The problem is, you know, there was this prehistoric settlement here that was basically obliterated by agriculture. So there's nothing really left. And that was their position. And we definitely have kept our eyes open. Like every time I'm out there, I'm looking for arrowheads and things of that nature. Not that I know a lot about that, but, you know, I'm in a couple Facebook groups, so I'm an expert, obviously, you know. And, you know, I looked for months. I didn't find anything. There's one guy in my office. He came out one time, and with 15 minutes, he picked one up. And I'm like, come on, people, come on. Been looking all summer. But no, we were really on the lookout, you know, for there's certain types of artifacts that would really trigger us to stop work and investigate. Bones, obviously, intact pottery, large points, knives, stuff like that. We didn't find any of that. We did try to document, for example, the waterworks, what came out of there. And I wanted to salvage some of those pumps, but that cast iron had become so rotten down in that wet hole for 103 years that when we pulled them out, they just broke apart. And we're talking about 5-foot tall chunks of cast iron, okay, that easily weighed 2,000 or 3,000 pounds a piece. And we sent it all to scrap, except for the pump plates. I saved those for the Bacher family so they could have those and buff them up and polish them.
That's so cool.
So do you think of on the east side of Park Heights, as you go along the Bacher property, the backside, is there any more piping or channeling or,
So
you know?
Yeah, there's definitely the wooden stave water pipe down there.
Yeah,
I would think that there's clay tile as well down there as well, but I don't know if they had a diversion or a separate waterworks. I know they had a pump house for a potable supply, but I don't know how they powered it. I don't really know.
Yeah, but I'm in even further going east. Is there more sort of excavation necessary? So.
We would love the opportunity to work downstream. I think we could restore, right down there, it's very incised, it erodes. It doesn't have a lot of tree cover. There's basic improvements that could be done. At the very least, a buffer would be nice, but it would be great to have more groundwater exchange and actually do the excavation down there, particularly since there's no woodland to destroy as part of that process. Now that I would also need woody debris from somewhere to build those in-channel habitat structures. But we would love the opportunity. We have the right geology, we have the right water, and we've gotten a handle on the watershed. Darren was talking a lot about, what he could do in channel and how rare it is where you can actually work in the watershed. We were able to actually work pieces of the watershed and change how water runs off the land. So that was a really important thing.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Hey, Jim, Andy Grosco here. I heard you say the word, and I tried to write it down, hypereic
exchange.
Could you say it slowly so I could write that?
I'm going to look up Google so I can tell you how to spell it because, engineers can't spell. That's a secret. Hypereic. Okay, it's HYPORHEIC. That just breaks like every rule I learned of spelling growing up. I before E, except after C, except before C in this case.
Yeah. Hypoic.
But yeah, that's the exchange of surface and groundwater.
Okay. Was it have the word connectivity in there also or no?
Connectivity, yeah.
Connectivity.
Hypereic connectivity.
Wow.
That's a great one next time you play Scrabble, folks. Everybody's going to get the thesaurus out.
Thank you.
Does the DNR plan to actually put some trout in there over time? So
that's another great question. So there is a stable trout population here, and we have the refugia and preservation areas that maintain that because what we did is very invasive, creating this new channel. Now that said, I am seeing trout in it already, and I am seeing benthos in it already, which is all very encouraging. But we just finished like 3 weeks ago, so that's all very encouraging. DNR typically doesn't like to stock this because they want to maintain the genetic integrity of the Jones Falls. And you guys would probably know more about whether they stock up or downstream, but I don't think they do stock. I think they rely on the wild population.
They're very protective of that wild trout population to the extent that it's off limits to even trout in the classroom. We cannot do anything there upstream of Lake Roland. So
yeah, so with that in mind, I've proposed, I said, if we can really get a handle on how this watershed's temperature is swinging up here, I said, there's no reason this wouldn't be suitable for brook trout, particularly after we get the herbaceous cover and the tree cover reestablished. And boy, the idea of reintroducing brook trout is controversial. Like, they're native, they're supposed to be there, but what genetics do you use? How does that interact with the brown trout fishery? And these are questions that, I hope we get to start answering when I am a much older man, but not right now.
That's a very good point, Jim. They're not adverse to taking wild strain brook trout populations from, say, the Pawnee Run there that runs along 83 there in Baltimore County. They've been known to glean some brook trout from there and try to.
And Owl Branch have them too.
Yeah. Yeah, they tried a little tributary in Carroll County called, of all things, Cold Run, and they didn't take, but within years, all of a sudden they started finding brown trout as a tributary to Morgan Run. Very cold water, really cold water.
And I know DNR hasn't taken data, just so you guys know on the call, I know they haven't taken data on Owl Branch since, I believe, like 2004. I was actually doing another study for another project over there, and I did see that there's still brook trout rather at Middletown Road on Owl Branch where they were observed before. So that population is still there.
Any other questions? You're a great engineer. You're a great speaker. You begin on time and you end on time.
I like to hope I'm a better scientist.
You're a great swell.
Thank
it was just the dimensions of knowledge that you brought to the table tonight is just unbelievable. Really, just things that we never even knew about what was going on upstream. And
oh yeah,
really, I mean, and to reiterate, this is a celebration of 50 years of this stream as our home water, and you really gave us a wonderful birthday present. Thank you, really, very, very much.
Hey, thank you for the opportunity, and thanks to all of you guys for what you do. I mean, people caring is how things get saved and restored, and I'm just happy to be able to be associated with you guys with this stuff. So thank you.
Well, I hope to see you and your colleagues on November 2nd. I hope all the participants this evening are there on the 2nd, and we can all raise a glass to 50 years of cold water conservation.
Yeah. Yeah. Jim, it was fantastic what you did. I'm not sure that you topped your last presentation,
but was kind of long. Yeah.
Yeah. I do want to point out that we did record the last presentation, and those of you that are listening to this and liked what he said, you really need to listen to the other one because it goes into more detail about how everything evolved and the history. And we did record it. So I'll make sure Sean gets it out on our webpage, you know, so thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah.
Yeah.